I was halfway through pumping heating oil into Mrs. Henderson's basement tank when I heard the diesel engine of a tow truck rumbling up behind my fuel delivery vehicle. My stomach dropped as I watched through the side mirror while some guy in a reflective vest attached chains to my truck's undercarriage. I dropped the fuel nozzle, making sure the automatic shutoff was engaged, and sprinted up the driveway toward the street. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" "That's my truck," I shouted, waving my arms. The tow truck driver, a middle-aged guy with a beard, just shrugged apologetically. "Sorry, man. Got a call from the HOA. They said this commercial vehicle is parked illegally in a residential zone. I'm literally in the middle of a fuel delivery. You can't just tow my truck while I'm working." My heart was pounding. The fuel line was still connected to Mrs. Henderson's tank, and my truck had about 8,000 gallons of heating oil in it. This wasn't some pickup truck you could just yank away. "Look, I'm just doing my job," the driver said, continuing to secure the chains. "Take it up with whoever called me. I got the work order right here." A white Lexus SUV pulled up next to us, and out stepped exactly the kind of person I'd been dreading. She was probably in her late 40s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board positions, wearing athleisure where that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck. Her face was already twisted into an expression of righteous indignation. "Finally," she announced, as if she'd been waiting for hours instead of probably just minutes. "I called about this monstrosity 30 minutes ago. Do you know how long this thing has been sitting here ruining our property values?" 20 minutes, I said flatly. "I've been here for exactly 20 minutes doing a scheduled fuel delivery, and I need to finish it before anyone can move my truck." She looked at me like I just suggested we sacrifice a goat in the middle of the street. "A fuel delivery? We don't allow commercial vehicles in Meadowbrook Estates. It's in the HOA bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 3. Lady, I don't care what your bylaws say. I'm delivering heating oil to Mrs. Henderson. You know, the thing that keeps her house warm, and I need to finish before you can tow anything." "My name is Brenda," she said, pulling herself up to her full height, which was maybe 5'4". "Brenda Carmichael, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, and you'll address me with respect, or I'll have you cited for harassment as well." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. My name is Paul Crawford, and I'd been running Crawford Fuel Services for 5 years now. My dad started the business back in the 80s, and I took it over when he retired. We serviced about 200 homes in this part of Connecticut, including at least 30 properties right here in Meadowbrook Estates. This wasn't my first encounter with an HOA, but it was definitely shaping up to be one of the most ridiculous. "Brenda, I'm Paul Crawford. I deliver fuel to about 30 houses in this neighborhood. If you tow my truck right now, not only will Mrs. Henderson's delivery be incomplete, but I won't be able to finish my other deliveries today. That includes the Petersons at 47 Maple, the Johnsons at 18 Oak, and about 6 other families who are expecting fuel today. Then perhaps you should have considered that before you parked this eyesore in our community," Brenda said, examining her manicured nails. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Crawford, no exceptions." The tow truck driver was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Lady, he's got a point. That's a fuel truck. I don't think I should be towing it while it's connected to a house. Are you refusing to do the job you were paid for?" Brenda's voice could have cut glass. "I'm saying it might not be safe," he replied. "And it's definitely not legal to tow a commercial vehicle that's actively providing utility services." Brenda pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'll call the police and have them sort this out. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your illegal parking situation." "Please do," I said, probably with more confidence than I felt. While you're at it, ask them about the laws regarding interference with utility service delivery. I'm pretty sure that's actually illegal in Connecticut. Her face turned an impressive shade of red, but she started dialing anyway. I took the opportunity to jog back down to Mrs. Henderson's basement to check on the delivery. The tank was about 2/3 full, and at the current flow rate, I probably had another 15 minutes to go. Mrs. Henderson herself appeared at the top of the basement stairs, looking worried. "Paul, dear, what's all the commotion about? Is everything all right?" Mrs. Henderson was 83 years old and had been a customer of my father's since before I was born. She lived alone since her husband passed away, and I always made sure to check in on her during deliveries, especially in the winter. "Just a misunderstanding with the HOA, Mrs. Henderson. Nothing to worry about. We'll have you topped off in just a few minutes." "That dreadful Brenda woman." "Oh, Paul, she's been terrorizing the whole neighborhood. Last month she tried to fine the Martins for having their Christmas lights up 2 days past the approved date. 2 days, as if anyone cares." I couldn't help but smile despite the situation. "Don't worry about it. Just stay inside where it's warm, okay? I'll handle this." Back at street level, a Hartford police cruiser had pulled up. 2 officers got out, looking about as thrilled to be there as I felt. The older one, whose nameplate read Officer Daniels, approached Brenda first, who immediately launched into a tirade about commercial vehicles and property values and the sanctity of HOA bylaws. "Madam," Officer Daniels interrupted, holding up a hand. "Let me talk to the driver first." "Sir, can you explain what's happening here?" I walked him through the situation, showing him my commercial delivery license, my scheduled delivery manifest, and the fuel line running from my truck to Mrs. Henderson's basement. "I've got about 15 more minutes on this delivery, officer. Then I've got 6 more stops in this neighborhood today. I've been servicing homes in Meadowbrook Estates for 5 years without any issues." Officer Daniels nodded, then turned to Brenda. "Madam, he's providing utility services. That's protected under Connecticut state law. You can't restrict access to utility service providers." "Heating oil isn't a utility," Brenda protested. "It's not like electric or water. This is a private commercial transaction." The younger officer, Rodriguez according to his tag, pulled out his phone and did a quick search. "Actually, madam, under Connecticut General Statutes Section 16262A, heating fuel delivery is classified as an essential utility service during the heating season, which we're currently in. HOAs can't restrict access." I tried not to look too smug. I'd dealt with this before, though usually people backed down before it got to the point of calling the police. Brenda's face was now approaching purple. "This is absurd. So anyone can just park any commercial vehicle they want in our neighborhood, and we have no recourse." "During active service delivery, correct," Officer Daniels said. "Look, madam, I understand you're trying to enforce your community rules, but state law supersedes HOA bylaws. The truck stays until he's done with his deliveries." "Deliveries, plural." Brenda's eyes widened. "How long is that going to take?" I checked my watch. "Well, I've got about 10 minutes left here, then 6 more stops. Probably another 4 hours total, assuming I don't have to stop and argue with you at every house." 4 hours? That's unacceptable," Officer Rodriguez sighed. "Madam, it's perfectly acceptable under the law. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual emergencies to respond to." "Sir," he nodded at me, "you're good to continue your work." As the officers got back in their cruiser, Brenda turned to the tow truck driver who had wisely stayed out of the argument. "You can go. I'm not paying you for a job you didn't complete." "You're paying me for the service call," he said firmly. "I showed up. I assessed the situation." That's $150. I will not, lady, I've got your signature on the work order. You called me out here. You owe me for my time. He unhooked his chains from my truck and climbed back into his cab. You can pay now or I can send it to collections. Your choice. Brenda actually stomped her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. I had to turn away to keep from laughing. She paid him with her credit card, practically throwing it at him, then turned her glare on me. This isn't over, Mr. Crawford. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. We're going to review our bylaws and find a way to keep your truck out of Meadowbrook Estates. Good luck with that, I said, heading back to finish Mrs. Henderson's delivery. You might want to check with the 30 families that depend on my service first, though. See how they feel about not being able to heat their homes because of your property value concerns. She didn't have a response to that, just got back in her Lexus and drove off with a squeal of tires that probably violated some HOA bylaw about excessive noise. Mrs. Henderson's tank finished filling up right on schedule. I went through my usual routine, checking for leaks, making sure everything was secure, and printing out her receipt. She insisted on making me a cup of tea, and while I really needed to get to my next stop, I never said no to Mrs. Henderson. We sat in her kitchen for about 10 minutes while she told me about her grandchildren and complained gently about the HOA. You know, Paul, when my husband and I moved here 30 years ago, there was no HOA. We just had a nice neighborhood association that organized block parties and kept the common areas maintained. Then about 10 years ago, some developer bought up 3 empty lots at the end of the street and built those McMansions. The new residents formed an HOA, and they somehow convinced enough of the original homeowners to vote it in. It's been nothing but trouble since then. Why'd the original residents vote for it? I asked, genuinely curious. Oh, they made all sorts of promises. Professional landscaping for the common areas, a new playground, better snow removal. And to be fair, they did deliver on some of that at first. But then people like Brenda got elected to the board, and suddenly it became more about control than community. She sent me a violation notice last fall because one of my fence posts was crooked. One post. I'm 83 years old, living on a fixed income, and she wanted me to replace my entire fence because of one crooked post. What did you do? Oh, I just straightened the post myself with some concrete mix. Took me about an hour. But it's the principle of the thing, you know. Why make an old woman's life harder over something so trivial? I finished my tea and promised to check in on her again at the next delivery. As I was walking back to my truck, my phone rang. It was James Peterson, one of my afternoon deliveries. Paul, hey, I just got a call from someone named Brenda Carmichael. She said you might not be able to make our delivery today because of some HOA violation. What's going on? I groaned. Of course she was calling my customers. There's no issue, James. I'll be there around 2:30 just like scheduled. Brenda's just upset because she doesn't like commercial vehicles in the neighborhood. But you deliver to half the street. What are we supposed to do, freeze? Exactly what I told her. Look, don't worry about it. I'll be there. If Brenda calls back, just ignore her. But James' call was just the first. Over the next 3 hours, as I made my way through my delivery route, I got 6 more calls from customers who'd been contacted by Brenda or other HOA board members. They were all being told that Crawford Fuel Services was in violation of community standards and that residents should consider switching to a different provider. The problem was, there wasn't really another provider. Well, that's not entirely true. There were 2 other heating oil companies that serviced this area of Connecticut, but both of them charged significantly more than I did, and neither of them offered the kind of personal service my dad had built the business on. We knew our customers, we checked on the elderly residents, we offered payment plans for people struggling with bills, and we never missed a delivery, even during the worst snowstorms. By the time I got to the Johnson house, my fourth stop, I was fuming. Mark Johnson met me at the door before I'd even started unloading the hose. Paul, thank God. Brenda Carmichael came by in person about an hour ago. She said if I accepted delivery from you, the HOA would fine me for facilitating commercial traffic violations. Is that even legal? No, it's not legal, and the police already confirmed it this morning. Mark, I need you to do me a favor. Can you spread the word to the other residents that Brenda's full of it? I don't have time to call everyone individually, and I need people to know they're not going to be fined for getting heating oil delivered. Absolutely. You know, a bunch of us have been getting fed up with her anyway. This might be the push we need to actually do something about it. That got my attention. Do something how? Recall election. If we can get 20% of homeowners to sign a petition, we can force a vote to remove board members. I've been thinking about organizing it for months, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. But this, threatening people's heat in January, that might finally be enough. I finished Mark's delivery while he made phone calls. By the time I was done, he'd already talked to 5 other homeowners, and all of them were on board with the recall petition. My 5th delivery went smoothly, but when I pulled up to my 6th stop, the Ramirez house, I found Brenda's white Lexus already parked in the driveway. She was standing on the front porch, talking animatedly to Carlos Ramirez, who looked deeply uncomfortable. I parked my truck on the street and walked up the driveway with my delivery manifest. Afternoon, Carlos. I've got your delivery ready to go. Carlos started, but Brenda cut him off. Mr. Ramirez has decided to cancel his delivery and switch to Summit Fuel Services. They've agreed to respect our community standards and park their trucks on the main road, then run their hoses from there. I looked at Carlos, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Carlos, is that true? You want to cancel? I'm sorry, Paul, he said quietly. Brenda showed me the bylaws. I can't afford the fines she's threatening. $500 per violation, and she's saying that every delivery would count as a separate violation. She can't legally fine you for this. We've been through this with the police already today. Brenda pulled out her phone and showed Carlos something on the screen. These are text messages from the HOA attorney confirming that we have the right to enforce parking restrictions. The police officer was wrong this morning. State law only protects utility service providers like electric and water companies, not private fuel delivery services. That's not what the officers said, I countered. And I'm pretty sure your attorney is wrong too. Connecticut general statutes specifically include heating fuel in the definition of essential services. Then take me to court, Brenda said with a satisfied smile. In the meantime, Mr. Ramirez doesn't want to risk the fines. Summit will be here tomorrow to fill his tank. I looked at Carlos again, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. He was a nice guy, a teacher at the local high school, and he definitely didn't have the money or energy to fight an HOA legal battle. Carlos, I get it. Do what you need to do. But just so you know, Summit charges about 30% more than I do, and they require payment up front. I'm always here if you change your mind. Back in my truck, I called my lawyer. Jennifer Martinez had handled my business legal work since I took over from my dad, and she dealt with her share of HOA disputes over the years. Paul, this is going to sound harsh, but you need to let this one go, she said after I explained the situation. Yes, you're legally in the right. Yes, the HOA is overstepping, but fighting them in court is going to cost you thousands of dollars and months of your time. Is it really worth it? Jennifer, if Brenda succeeds in scaring off my customers in Meadowbrook Estates, that's 30 accounts. That's about 15% of my business. And if other HOAs hear about this and decide to try the same thing, I could lose a lot more. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, fair point. Let me look into the specific statutes and case law. I'll get back to you tomorrow with a formal opinion. In the meantime, continue your deliveries as scheduled. Don't let them intimidate you into stopping service. That would be the worst thing you could do. My 7th delivery of the day was to Alina Patterson, a widow in her 70s who'd been a close friend of my mother's before she passed away. Alina's house was at the far end of Meadowbrook Estates, and as I pulled up, I saw her standing outside waiting for me, wrapped in a thick coat and looking agitated. "Paul, thank heavens you're still making deliveries. That horrible woman called me and said you were banned from the neighborhood." "Not banned, Alina. Just some confusion about parking rules. How's your fuel level? Getting low? I was worried I might have to find someone else, but I don't even know who else to call. Your father delivered to this house for 25 years and you've never let me down." The delivery went smoothly, and Alina insisted on paying me in cash, as she always did. "My Frank never trusted banks after 2008, she always said, though Frank had been gone for over a decade now. As I was coiling up my delivery hose, a silver Mercedes pulled up behind my truck. A well-dressed man in his 60s got out, looking official and slightly annoyed. "Are you Paul Crawford?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Richard Stanton, Vice President of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Board. I need to talk to you about this morning's incident." I tensed, expecting another confrontation. But Richard's demeanor wasn't aggressive like Brenda's had been. He looked more tired than anything. "Look, Mr. Crawford, I want to apologize for Brenda's behavior today. She can be overzealous in enforcing the rules. The truth is, most of the board members didn't even know about her calling the tow truck until after it happened." "Okay," I said cautiously. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that as far as I'm concerned, and as far as at least 2 other board members are concerned, you're welcome to continue your deliveries without harassment. We understand that you provide an essential service, and we don't want to make our residents' lives harder." That's good to hear, but Brenda seemed pretty committed to stopping me. She's calling my customers, threatening them with fines. Richard sighed deeply. "She doesn't have the authority to issue fines without a board vote, and I can guarantee that vote won't happen. The problem is, Brenda thinks being HOA president means she can make unilateral decisions. She's been a problem for a while now, but she's also very good at organizing support among a certain segment of residents. The ones who care more about property values than common sense." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Exactly. Look, I'll talk to her and the other board members tonight. We'll send out an email to all residents clarifying that fuel delivery services are permitted and that there will be no fines related to accepting these deliveries. Will that work for you?" "It would help," I admitted. "But I need more than just an email. I need assurance that Brenda won't retaliate against residents who use my service in other ways. You know, suddenly finding other violations to cite them for." Richard rubbed his face. "I can't promise that won't happen. Brenda's very creative when she wants to be vindictive. But I can promise that I'll push back on any obvious retaliation. And between you and me, there's a recall petition starting to circulate. If enough people sign it, we'll have a special election, and Brenda will likely be voted out." "How long would that take?" 30 days from when the petition is certified, assuming they get enough signatures. And from what I'm hearing, they'll have more than enough by the end of the week." We talked for a few more minutes, and Richard gave me his personal cell phone number. "If Brenda harasses you or any of your customers again, call me directly. I'll handle it." I finished my last delivery of the day around 6 p.m., exhausted and frustrated, but at least feeling like the situation might not be completely hopeless. When I got back to my depot, my assistant manager, Tom Rivera, was still there, looking worried. "Boss, we've got a problem. I got a call about an hour ago from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. They're demanding copies of all our delivery schedules, insurance certificates, and business licenses. They said if we don't provide them within 48 hours, they're going to file a complaint with the state." Let me guess. Brenda Carmichael. How'd you know? I filled him in on the day's events. Tom had been working for Crawford Fuel Services for 3 years since he got out of the Army, and he was generally unflappable. But even he looked concerned about this. "Can they really demand all that information?" he asked. "I doubt it. They're not a government entity. But I'll check with Jennifer tomorrow. In the meantime, don't respond to them." That night, I barely slept. I kept running scenarios through my head, trying to figure out the best way to handle Brenda and the HOA. The business my father built was more than just a job to me. It was a legacy, a connection to him even after he retired and moved to Florida with my mom. The thought of losing a significant chunk of our customer base because of one power-hungry HOA president made my blood boil. The next morning, Jennifer called me at 7 a.m. "Paul, I've got good news and bad news. Which do you want first?" "Bad news. Always." "The bad news is that the statute about heating fuel as an essential utility service is somewhat ambiguous. It clearly protects providers from being blocked during emergency situations, but there's less clarity about routine deliveries during non-emergency times. An HOA could potentially argue that you could make deliveries during specific approved hours or from designated locations. That's ridiculous. My truck is huge. I can't park it 3 blocks away and run a hose to someone's house." "I know, and that's where the good news comes in. There's case law from a 2019 dispute in Massachusetts that's pretty directly applicable. An HOA tried to restrict oil deliveries similar to what's happening to you, and the court ruled that any restriction that effectively prevents reasonable access to heating fuel is invalid, regardless of the HOA's bylaws. The ruling specifically said that requiring providers to park outside the community and run hoses unreasonable distances constituted an effective prohibition of service. So I'm in the clear, you're in the clear. But here's my advice: document everything. Every delivery, every interaction with the HOA, every threatened fine. If this does end up in court, you want a clear record. Also, I'd recommend getting written statements from your customers in Meadowbrook Estates about how essential your service is to them. Over the next week, things got worse before they got better. Brenda escalated her campaign against my business with an intensity that would have been impressive if it weren't so destructive. She sent certified letters to all 30 of my customers in Meadowbrook Estates, threatening them with $500 fines for each fuel delivery they accepted. She filed a complaint with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, claiming my trucks were creating environmental hazards. She even contacted my insurance company with a complaint that my commercial vehicles were operating in restricted areas, apparently hoping they'd drop my coverage, but she miscalculated. Every action she took pushed more residents toward supporting the recall petition. The threatening letters especially backfired. People who had been on the fence about the HOA's increasingly aggressive enforcement policies suddenly found themselves personally affected, and they weren't happy about it. I got a call on a Wednesday morning from Mark Johnson, who'd been organizing the recall effort. "Paul, you're not going to believe this. We needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to force the recall vote. We've got 53%, People are furious. How many people actually paid those fines she was threatening? I asked. Not a single one. Richard Stanton sent out an email clarifying that the board never authorized any fines, and any notices from Brenda were sent without board approval. That just made people angrier. She was threatening them with unauthorized penalties. Is that even legal? For an HOA president to send out fine notices without board approval? Probably not. And it gets better. Do you know Sandra Blake? She lives on Willow Court. I deliver to her, yeah. Retired lawyer, right? Yep. She's putting together a class action lawsuit against Brenda personally for harassment and extortion. She's got about 15 homeowners signed up already. I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction at that, though I tried not to be too vindictive. Brenda had caused me significant stress and cost me at least one customer, but she'd brought most of this on herself. That afternoon, I had a delivery scheduled for the Petersons at 47 Maple Street. As I pulled up, I saw what looked like a block party in progress. There were people gathered in the street. Someone had set up a folding table with coffee and donuts, and several residents were holding signs that said things like, "We need heating oil" and "Essential services matter." James Peterson came jogging up to my truck as I parked. "Paul, welcome to the first annual Meadowbrook Estates Fuel Delivery Appreciation Party. We figured if Brenda was going to make a big deal out of your truck being here, we'd make an even bigger deal about supporting you." I was genuinely touched. Over the next 2 hours, as I made deliveries to 3 houses on that street, residents kept coming by to shake my hand, thank me for my service, and tell me stories about how Brenda had overstepped her authority in various ways over the years. One couple told me about being fined for having the wrong color mailbox. Another resident showed me a violation notice he'd received for parking his own car on the street overnight while his garage was being cleaned. Eleanor Patterson brought out homemade cookies. Mrs. Henderson showed up with her grandson, who apparently wanted to see the fuel truck up close. It turned into a genuine community gathering, and ironically, it was all because Brenda's overreach had reminded people what actually mattered: neighbors taking care of each other. Of course, Brenda herself made an appearance. She pulled up in her white Lexus around 3 p.m., took one look at the gathering, and started taking photos with her phone. "What are you all doing?" she demanded. "This is a violation of the HOA's assembly regulations. You need a permit for gatherings of more than 10 people on community property." "We're on the street, Brenda. That's public property, not HOA property," James Peterson said calmly. "We checked." "You're all here to support an illegal commercial operation." "Nothing illegal about it," Sandra Blake interrupted. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and the kind of presence that made you pay attention. "I've reviewed the relevant statutes, and Mr. Crawford is absolutely within his rights to make these deliveries. What's actually illegal is you threatening residents with unauthorized fines. That's extortion, Brenda. That's a criminal offense." Brenda's face went white, then red, then white again. "I was acting in my capacity as HOA president without board authorization. We've already confirmed that with Richard Stanton and the other board members. You acted unilaterally and illegally." Sandra pulled out a folder. "I'm serving you notice that 15 residents of Meadowbrook Estates are filing suit against you personally for harassment, extortion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You've been served." She handed Brenda a thick stack of papers. Brenda took them with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the first page. You can't. The HOA will provide legal defense." "Actually, they won't," Richard Stanton said, walking up from behind her. "I hadn't even seen him arrive." "The board voted last night, Brenda." Unanimous decision, minus your vote since you weren't present. The HOA will not provide legal defense for actions taken without board authorization. You're on your own. You held a board meeting without me. That's against the bylaws. Emergency meeting, properly noticed to all board members including you. You chose not to attend. We have the email receipts proving you were notified. I stood there watching this unfold, feeling like I was watching a movie. Brenda looked around at the gathered residents, all of whom were staring at her with varying degrees of anger and satisfaction. She clutched the lawsuit papers to her chest and practically ran back to her car. After she drove away, the party atmosphere returned, though with an undercurrent of relief. Richard came over to talk to me while I was coiling up my hose after the third delivery. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said. "The board should have reined her in months ago. We all knew she was getting out of control, but nobody wanted to deal with the conflict." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now? Well, the recall petition has more than enough signatures, so we'll have a special election in 3 weeks. Brenda will almost certainly be voted out, and Sandra Blake has already agreed to run for president. Beyond that, we're going to do a complete review of our bylaws and enforcement policies." A lot of what Brenda was doing wasn't technically against our rules, but that's because our rules gave the president way too much unilateral authority. "Will the lawsuit go anywhere?" Richard shrugged. "I'm not a lawyer, but Sandra is, and she seems pretty confident. At minimum, I think Brenda will end up settling and agreeing to resign immediately rather than waiting for the recall election. That's probably the best outcome for everyone. Over the next 2 weeks, that's exactly what happened." Brenda's lawyer apparently took one look at the case and advised her to settle. She agreed to resign from the HOA board immediately, issue written apologies to all the residents she'd threatened, and pay a modest settlement to cover the legal fees of the people who'd filed suit. In exchange, they agreed not to pursue the case further. The recall election still went forward, since it had already been set in motion, but it became more of a formality. Sandra Blake ran unopposed for president and won with 92% of the vote. The other board members who'd enabled Brenda's behavior either resigned or chose not to run for re-election. My business went back to normal, or actually better than normal. The publicity from the whole incident brought me some new customers from neighboring communities. Apparently, word spread about the fuel delivery company that stood up to an out-of-control HOA, and people liked that. Carlos Ramirez called me about a month after everything settled down. "Paul, I know I bailed on you when Brenda was threatening fines. I'm sorry about that. Summit did my delivery last month and they charged me almost twice what you would have, and the driver didn't even check the tank gauge properly. I got a short delivery, and when I called to complain, they basically told me to deal with it. Can I come back to Crawford Fuel Services?" "Of course, Carlos. I never held it against you. You were in a tough spot. When do you need your next delivery?" We scheduled him for the following week, and I made sure to give him a 10% discount for the trouble he'd been through. The new HOA board, under Sandra's leadership, turned out to be everything the old board should have been. They actually cared about community welfare rather than just enforcing arbitrary rules. One of their first actions was to revise the bylaws to explicitly protect access to utility services, including fuel delivery, trash collection, and other essential services. They also implemented a new rule that no fines could be issued without a vote of at least 3 board members, preventing any future president from going rogue like Brenda had. About 3 months after the whole incident, I got an unexpected phone call from a journalist at the Hartford Courant. She'd heard about what happened and wanted to do a story about HOA overreach and the importance of essential service providers. Mr. Crawford, I'm working on a piece about how HOAs sometimes overstep their authority in ways that hurt residents. Your case seems like a perfect example. Would you be willing to be interviewed? I was hesitant at first, but Jennifer encouraged me to do it. It's good publicity, and it might help other service providers who are dealing with similar issues. The article came out 2 weeks later, and it was actually really well done. The journalist interviewed me, several Meadowbrook Estates residents, Sandra Blake, and even got a comment from Richard Stanton about how the board had failed to provide proper oversight. She also interviewed 2 other business owners in Connecticut who dealt with similar HOA conflicts, including a landscaper who'd been banned from an entire community because the HOA president didn't like his truck's color. The article got picked up by some national news outlets, and suddenly, I was getting calls from people all over the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. It was overwhelming, but it also felt good to know that by standing my ground, I'd helped shine a light on a problem that affected a lot of people. One evening about 4 months after the initial incident, I was having dinner with my parents, who'd driven up from Florida for a visit. My dad, who'd built Crawford Fuel Services from nothing, listened to the whole story with a mixture of pride and concern. "You handled it right, son," he said when I finished. "Your grandfather, who started me in this business, always said that we're not just delivering fuel, we're taking care of our neighbors. The moment you let someone push you around, you stop being able to do that job properly. But you've got to be careful too. Not every fight is worth fighting." I know, Dad. Honestly, there were times I thought about just pulling out of Meadowbrook Estates entirely. It would have been easier. But then I thought about Mrs. Henderson and Alina Patterson and all the other customers who were counting on me. I couldn't just abandon them because one person was making my life difficult. "That's exactly right," my mom said. "Your father got calls at 2 in the morning from customers who ran out of fuel, and he always went out, no matter the weather, no matter the time. That's what made this business special. That's why people stayed loyal for 30, 40 years. The following week, I had a delivery scheduled for Mrs. Henderson. As always, she had tea ready and insisted I sit down for a few minutes. We talked about her grandchildren, about the weather, about how the neighborhood had changed over the years. "You know, Paul, what happened with Brenda was unfortunate, but something good came from it," she said, pouring me a second cup of tea. "People in Meadowbrook Estates had gotten complacent. We'd let the HOA become this powerful entity without really paying attention to what they were doing. Your situation woke us up. Now we've got people attending board meetings, asking questions, actually participating in community governance. That's how it should be." "I'm glad something positive came from it," I said. "Though I could have done without the stress," she laughed. "I'm sure you could have, but you stood up for what was right and you didn't back down when it would have been easier to just give up. That takes character. Your father and mother raised you well." As I drove away from Mrs. Henderson's house that day, I reflected on how strange the whole experience had been. I'd started the business from my dad, expecting to quietly deliver fuel to homes, maintain relationships with customers, and build a sustainable living. I never expected to end up in a battle with an HOA president, to be featured in newspaper articles, or to become some kind of minor symbol of standing up to bureaucratic overreach. But maybe that was the point. Most of us don't go looking for these fights. They find us, usually at the most inconvenient times, and we have to decide whether to stand our ground or back down. I'd chosen to stand my ground, not because I was particularly brave or principled, but because backing down would have meant abandoning the people who depended on me. A year later, Meadowbrook Estates was a different place. Sandra Blake ran a transparent, reasonable HOA that focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. The neighborhood still looked nice, property values were stable, and residents actually seemed to like living there rather than constantly worrying about violation notices. Brenda Carmichael moved out of the neighborhood about 6 months after resigning from the board. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different town, and somewhat ironically, was dealing with her own HOA issues at her new place. Some people never learn. As for me, Crawford Fuel Services continued to grow. I hired 2 new drivers to keep up with demand, invested in a newer, more efficient truck, and even expanded our service area into 2 additional counties. The business that my grandfather started and my father built was thriving, and I was proud to carry it forward. On the anniversary of the day my truck almost got towed, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA organized what they called Essential Services Appreciation Day. They invited me and representatives from the electric company, water department, trash collection service, and other providers to a community barbecue. It was their way of saying thank you to all the people who kept the neighborhood running smoothly, but often went unnoticed. Eleanor Patterson gave a speech about the importance of community, of looking out for each other, and of remembering that rules should serve people, not the other way around. Mrs. Henderson presented me with a plaque that read Crawford Fuel Services, keeping Meadowbrook Estates warm for 3 decades. I was genuinely touched. That evening, as I drove home with the plaque on my passenger seat, I thought about how a single day of conflict had transformed into something positive. Brenda's attempt to assert her authority and push me out of the neighborhood had backfired completely, bringing the community together and ultimately making Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. I thought about all the people who'd supported me during that difficult time. Jennifer, my lawyer, who'd given me solid legal advice. Richard Stanton, who'd had the integrity to stand up to Brenda even though it was uncomfortable. Mark Johnson and the other residents who'd organized the recall petition. Sandra Blake, who channeled her legal expertise into protecting her neighbors. And most of all, my customers like Mrs. Henderson and Eleanor Patterson, who'd never doubted me for a moment. The experience had taught me that community isn't just about living near each other or following the same rules. It's about taking care of each other, standing up for what's right, and remembering that we're all in this together. An HOA can be a force for good when it's run by people who understand that. But when it's run by people who care more about control than community, it can become toxic quickly. I'd been lucky that the residents of Meadowbrook Estates had recognized what was happening and taken action to fix it. Not every HOA story ends that way, but this one did, and I was grateful for that. As I pulled into my driveway that night, my phone rang. It was a new customer in a different town, asking about fuel delivery service. I spent a few minutes going over our rates, our service area, and our delivery schedule. At the end of the call, she asked, "Are you the Paul Crawford who had that issue with the HOA last year?" "That's me," I admitted, wondering where this was going. "Good," she said. "I want to do business with someone who stands up for what's right. When can you schedule my first delivery?" I smiled and pulled out my calendar. Even a year later, that whole mess with Brenda was still bringing me new customers. Funny how things work out sometimes.